Hey guys, this is Thrill, and today I'm going to be going over the first leg of RSHL Season 24. We're about a third of the way through the season. Every team except for Salty Puckers, I believe, has played 5 or 6 games, and it's a 15-game season. And Salty Puckers has only played 3 because of a lot of postponements and reschedules and things like that. But if I were to wait for them to play 5 or 6 games, a lot of the other teams will have played, 7, 8, or 9 games by the time they catch up. So I just decided to go ahead and make this video. And so what we're going to go over today is briefly going to talk about the overall standings and some of the league leaders and goals and assists and things like that. And then we'll go in depth into each team and how they're performing and what they're doing well and what they're not doing well and things like that. And then we'll talk about each team's kind of like league news, like trades and things like that. Before I forget, I will apologize for the quality. This is something I kind of just threw together, so I know that the production value isn't very high. I didn't have a ton of time to spend on that, so I didn't really, perfect the resolution windows for everything to like fit perfectly and to have there not be any extra space or letters here and there. So sorry about that. Alright, so first thing that we'll do is just go over the standings briefly. So we have Goat Milk as the number 1 team right now, undefeated, 5-0. A pretty good goal differential, plus 21, 32 goals for, and 11 goals against. This is what I expected personally, based on team strength before the league. I did say in my preseason write-up I thought Goat Milk would probably have a reasonably uncomplicated regular season, would just kind of be able to beat most of the teams based on skill differential. Young Money is number 2 at 4-1. I did not have them ranked as number 2 in my preseason write-ups. I think I had them as 4th, although I had them in the same league as kind of the other teams, where, I thought they were still a solid team. So, a little bit of a surprise, but not something that's, like, outside of the realm of possibility to where, like, I'm absolutely shocked that they're number 2 right now. Number 3 is VIOP's Playmakers, Violence's team, obviously. They're 3-3 with 6 points, and probably underachieving a little bit compared to what people expected for the preseason. I think that Violence probably had one of the stronger drafts. On paper, probably the second best draft in my opinion. And people were expecting his team to do pretty well. They're doing fine so far, but they have dropped a couple of games that I think people didn't really expect them to drop. And then we have 3 teams, Salty Puckers, Chicks with Sticks, and Understand, all with 1 win. I guess philosophically you can keep Salty Puckers at 4th here because they've played less games, so they have to lose their next 2 or 3 games in order to stay on the bottom with Chicks with Sticks and Understand, who have lost more games. So it seems fair to me to just go ahead and put them in that 4th slot. But, of course, like I said, they've only played 3 games, so I have the least information about that team, so it won't be as good of an in-depth analysis for that team. Chicks with Sticks in 5th with 1 win and 4 losses. This is probably the team that's underachieving the most. They definitely have one of the better rosters on paper, and they also had a much better preseason. Of course, preseason doesn't matter for much, but I don't think people expected Chicks with Sticks to only have 1 win and 4 losses at this point in the season with some of the trades that they made and the improvements they made to their roster. I'll go into depth why I think that reason is later on when I'm doing the analysis. And Understand, with 1 win and 5 losses, have gotten blown out in a lot of games. Obviously, that 17 points for and 48 goals against really sticks out like a sore thumb. But they have got a win against Salty Puckers already, and I honestly, before the season, wasn't 100% sure if this team is going to be winning games. So the fact that they have won that game is definitely a good sign, and I look forward to seeing them try to pick up a couple more wins throughout the season. So compared to the preseason, I mean, we can just go over that real quick. Young Money was 5-0, and they are number 2 in the league right now, so that's not that different. Shakes with Sticks is 2-1-1, and right now they're like 1-4, so a little underachieving. And then the rest of the teams all only have 1 win in the preseason, so that actually isn't very helpful, I guess. Some teams played a lot more games than others in the preseason, huh? All right. So just a brief overview of like the league leaders and some of the main categories. For goals, we have Thrill, myself, and Xanaz tied at 11. Xanaz does have a little bit more ice time, so it's probably fair to say that in the next 20 minutes, around 2 periods, I probably will score a goal or two, I would think. But he does have more assists than me at the moment. And then we have a big 4-way tie for 3rd place, where a lot of people have 8 goals. Doobie, Rage, Zeppelin, TSZ. Pretty good spread of teams there as well. Assists, we have Londorf leading the league by a fair margin with 16 assists. Xanaz is 2nd with 11. Bot Mem from Playmakers is 3rd with 9, and then another large tie with 8 for a lot of players: Doobie, Image, African Panda, and Leafy. And then looking at the steals, JDM Spoon leads from Understand, leads in both steals and turnovers. That is a lot of turnovers. But he is on, one of the lower tier teams, and he's done well to score as many points as he has, at least on the bottom tier team, so good for him. And then checks and check desk, of course, that's going to be the levies. Yeah, Image and Arcadian at the top, and VFlex, and then CM Dross is up there as well on the Spiders, so good on him. And then goalie stats, we have Mitch leading in saves by a wide margin with 144, which makes sense because his team is facing so many more shots. It makes sense he's going to be ahead in saves. Save percentage is 75%, and 8.21 goals allowed. Now, I do think that Mitch has been overrated by some people, to where I think he can be okay, but I don't think that he is a top-tier goaltender, where some people were kind of hyping him up a lot. I do think that it's not his fault. I mean, that his goals allowed average is high. Obviously, that comes about as part of the amount of shots he's facing, and of course the quality of the team that he's on. So I'll cut him a little bit of a break on this, but I do think that he is inconsistent himself anyway, where I think FC makes some really good saves, but he also lets in some goals that you would not expect a decent goaltender to allow. Just my 2 cents. Jean-Claude Van Damme from Goat Milk has 86, we'll round it up to 87, 86.89, 87% save percentage with 1.71 goals allowed. Very stellar numbers. Skill-wise, in my opinion, probably undisputedly the best goalie in the league. Since Lennox isn't playing anymore, you can't even have him in the argument. Ziz with 80% save percentage and 3.73 goals allowed, so that's respectable. He's playing goalie for Playmakers. Slim Reaper, 85 save percentage. I think if you include the game against Salty Puckers that got left out of stats, it's like 86, and 2.82 goals allowed. So, I mean, it's still early on in the season, but this is his best season statistically so far to this point. It does make sense that the teams that are winning a lot are going to have goalies with higher save percentages. So we'll see if he's able to keep that up, but if he is able to keep those numbers up, then this is going to be his best statistical season by far, where he's been pretty average and some seasons even below average in terms of save percentage. And Boogeyman, Tadakuro Megumi, whatever, 75% save percentage with 4.45 goals allowed. Obviously, some people were hyping him up in the preseason. Some of it was facetious, some of it was not, but he is not performing very well thus far. Cereal and Milk with a 92% save percentage, which is insane, but Salty Puckers have also only played 3 games, and Cereal and Milk himself has only played 41 minutes. So obviously that's a crazy save percentage, but limited ice time. So if he maintains the save percentage through a lot of the rest of the games, then that is absolutely bonkers. I'm assuming it'll normalize more towards the other goalie save percentages as time goes on, though. And those are, I believe, the starting goalies. All right. So to make sure I don't spend too much time on this, I need to go ahead and just start talking about the teams themselves. And we'll just go in order of the standings. So first off, we'll go with Goat Milk. Like I said before, undefeated so far, 5-0. With the best goal differential, plus 21. Pretty massive goal differential for this point in the season. Goat Milk has played every team except for Salty Puckers, and they have played Understand twice. So goal differential could be inflated a little bit because of that. But Goat Milk has beaten some of the other teams by quite a wide margin as well. So, you know, I don't think it's any inflated that much. I already talked about some of the leaders on this team because they were near the top of the league, of course, since they're number 1 right now. Alon Dwarf leading the team in points, 7 goals and 16 assists. Thrill leading in goals with 11. And then Rage right behind that with 8 goals and 16 assists, 14 points, 2 Thrills, 16. And then, of course, I talked about Super Dan having a very, very stellar performance in net thus far. And I did expect the team to be undefeated to this point. I mean, they probably will only lose a couple of games all season if they lose at all. Just because I do think that there is a pretty big skill differential between this team and other teams. Just on an individual basis and just sports IQ as well. Like, I think most of the players on the starting lineup of Goat Milk have pretty high game IQ. And know how to play as a team and kind of fundamentally know how the game works as opposed to just playing the game as a, good checking, a good shooting kind of thing. I mean, honestly, I think there are about 4 players on this team that can be first-round picks. So, it makes total sense that they're number 1. One important thing that sticks out to me is that all the players, even though they have some pretty decent offensive production, are pretty close in terms of having even steal or turnover ratios. And a lot of players that put up a lot of offensive production tend to not have extremely stellar ratios because having a ton of offensive production tends to drive your turnovers up because you're trying to create chances and you're taking shots, a lot of shots and things like that. So they've done well to keep those numbers pretty close. They do have a lot of puck time on their players, where one of the team's strengths is they have a lot of puck facilitators, and they like to puck cycle and control the puck more than the other team, which they've done in pretty much every game, I think. I think one game with playmakers, the shots and playing time, puck time was kind of close, but aside from that, they kind of just blew the other teams out of the water in those categories. And I mean, there's not much else to say, just roster-wise. I mean, there's 4 or 5 MOPs on this team, at the very least. I think a couple more have even been nominated at some point in time. So, there's, like I said, there's just not much else to say, and it's kind of awkward to talk about my own team. So, we'll probably just move on from here and start talking about the other teams. Young Money is in the 2nd place slot right now with 4 wins and 1 losses. And like I said, I didn't necessarily have them ranked this high in my preseason rankings. It's not crazy to see them up here. We'll see if they stay in the number 2 spot for the whole season. I do think that they have exceeded my expectations a little bit just watching them play based on how I thought they might play. But I will say this, I'm not convinced that they will blow the other teams out of water and are going to be the clear number 2 team. I think that as Playmakers starts to sort out their issues, they might rise up and challenge for that spot. And there are some other teams that if they make some adjustments, might challenge for that spot as well. I do think that the second through fourth place teams are all reasonably even, that I think they're all solid teams who can compete with one another. But to this point, Young Money has done well. Now, in their game, they've played every team once, I believe. Yeah. They beat every team again except for Goat Milk. And Playmakers was kind of, you can say, maybe they kind of got away with one there. It was a 7-7 tie game. And then they won off of an own goal in overtime. I mean, you can't say that they don't deserve the win per se, but it's kind of fortunate to get a win like that. But once again, it goes to illustrate that I don't think they're like just the clear number 2 going to dominate everybody else except for the, Goat Milk in the league. So we'll have to see if they keep that level up. They did lose to Goat Milk. That is their loss. And Batman was hyping the team up a lot, thinking they were going to be number 1. I thought Goat Milk kind of was, washed up and stuff and didn't do well in the preseason. I did expect Young Money in particular to struggle against Goat Milk because a lot of their players, like TSZ, sorry, I know people say T-Money Z and whatever, I just say TSZ. I just always have. And Aceto, they score a lot of their goals based on skill. Like, they try to force goals through on their skill. So that they have pretty good checking, pretty good shooting. They can handle the puck and stuff like that. And they know they have good aim. And that reflects in their play. You see them take a lot of lower percentage shots, a lot of snipes that a lot of other players can't make work, and they can make them work sometimes, which is why they try them. But against the best goalies in the league, like Super Dan, you're going to have a lot less luck taking those snipes and taking those low percentage shots because they're going to be, more adept at saving them. I mean, the better goalies in the league, like Linux and Super Dan, it's going to be very hard to score these snipe goals, even if you place them perfectly, just because they have enough time to react and they're aware enough to where they can save those shots. So in the playoffs, when teams are playing tight defense and when you're playing against solid goalies, you really have to depend a little bit more on passing plays and puck cycling in front of the net to draw people out of position to the point to where the shot that you take is pretty much open. Like, you don't have to worry about beating the goalie because, the goal is just an open goal based on the passing that has occurred beforehand. You're not really going to have an easy time of just trying to straight up beat Super Dan, with good shots, because he's going to save most of them. So I think that they match up poorly against Goat Milk for that reason. One interesting thing to note is that they seem to have bought more into their team than other teams have. What I mean by that is they're all about the Young Money culture. Out of the teams we played, they were probably the best at like being organized. Like, they were all like trying to get back on D, trying to get all 5 players back in front of the net and having like a team effort on defense. And we're trying to, buy into a style or play a specific way as a unit. So they're serious about trying to do well and winning as Young Money, and that's good. And that will give them advantage over some of the other teams, for sure. One problem I do think they have is, I said this in my preseason write-up as well, I feel like they lack an offensive superstar. Like, I think they need one more strong offensive star kind of player to push them over the top. Because right now, I mean, they kind of have TSZ, and then they have a bunch of supportive type players. I mean, I guess you can throw Aceto in there. He had a lot of goals and stuff last season as well, but I mean, he's not a star. Like, I talked about this in my preseason write-up a little bit, not trying to be harsh, but TSZ and Aceto had record seasons last season, but a lot of players took last season off. There was less competition, in my opinion. The teams weren't as good. A lot of players that normally occupy the high stat slots that TSE and Aceto filled were not playing. And I think that they will still perform decently this season statistically, but I don't think it'll be like last season where they were at the top. One worry that I have with having TSE as your main offensive guy, which he clearly is, I don't think any other players on the team are capable of being are going to be like scoring more goals than he is. The problem I have with it is he is a skilled player. He has good shots. He's good at controlling the puck himself individually. Good at moving around. Good at checking. Good at passing and things like that. He has a lot of positive qualities. One area where I think that he has not really developed yet is he sometimes seems to have trouble integrating other players and being able to utilize them to propel himself forward. And what I mean by that is you see a lot of his goals are kind of individual efforts where he's just straight up beating the goalie with a nice move or a nice shot or something like that. And of course you want to be able to do that, but when it comes to the other style of play, which is, slowing it down and cycling it around a lot more and beating goalies just based off of puck cycling kind of play, where everybody's just drawn so far out of position that the goalie has no chance to make the save. I do think that's something that he might need to work on a little bit, which is something you can definitely work on with practice. I mean, that's more of a stylistic and mental approach than anything else. But if the players like TSE and Aceto keep relying on these snipes and things of that nature and these like high skill shots, that's not going to be as successful in the playoffs. And that style is really, overall, I think, is strong, taking advantage of the mid-tier and lower-tier goalies and the mid-tier and lower-tier teams. But, that kind of style will struggle in the playoffs. I mean, Puker, I like Puker a lot. He's a great passer, great team player, but he's never been that all-star that just scores a ridiculous amount of goals for the team. So he's not going to be that guy. African Panda is another guy, is very supportive. Aceto, underperforming this season compared to last season already, where he only has a couple of goals. And has been struggling against some of the increased competition of this season. Or maybe it's that he's having trouble integrating with a specific team. I don't know what it is. But, I mean, you can see just on the stat line, you have TSC with 8 goals and 6 assists, 14 points. Way ahead of other people. African Panda has 8 assists, but only 2 goals. Puker has 4 goals and 2 assists. Aceto with 2 goals. And you can see this in the overall stats as well. They have 24 points for and 17 points against. And I believe in the overall standings, they have substantially less goals scored than Goat Milk and Playmakers. And that's going to be an issue, as the season moves forward. They need to get another offensive guy that's going to help contribute and put the goals in. I do think that, for me, TSZ's best role is to be that second guy that is putting up a lot of points and contributing a lot to the team, but isn't like the sole offensive star of the team. I do think he has a little bit more work to go before he gets to that, point where he's the offensive star that you can just completely build your team around. I think that his best role is in that strong offensive contribution slot, like right behind your offensive star. And that's good because a lot of times the offensive stars have some nights where they don't perform as well, and then when you have a player like TSE in that second spot who's going to pick up that slack and still be contributing a lot of points for you, he's going to fit in well in that spot. But he does control the puck a lot. As you can see, he has most puck time on the team and most puck carries by a fair bit. And the Weasel is definitely suitable for doing this. I mean, you can make a lot of good passes, but especially if you want to be that number one goal scoring guy as a Weasel, I think you need to consciously try to step away from that a little bit and let African Panda or somebody else control a little bit more of the puck in the midfield and in the offensive third, because you want to be putting yourself in a place where you're going to receive the puck from somebody else and then bury the goals, kind of, under the radar. You want to receive the puck that's going to create an opening when people move and then bury your shot. Whereas if you're the guy that's controlling the puck all the time, the focus is always on you, and the goalie is going to be a little bit more prepared for the shots that you're going to put up based on, the formation that you're kind of running through there. V-Flex has been playing Levy defenseman for Young Money, and I do think that he's done pretty well. Levy defensemen are really annoying when they're being played at a reasonable level. And he was pretty annoying when Goat Milk played against Young Money as well. And in that last game, Goat Milk really dominated Young Money in a lot of ways. Like, the shots was like over 20, and Young Money had 8 shots. We had like 5 more minutes of puck time or something crazy. Maybe not exactly 5 minutes, but it was a lot more puck time. But the score was not that uneven. It was only 3-1. And I think that V-Flex was one of the reasons that contributed to that factor. He was annoying on defense and kind of helped Batman to mitigate the offensive pressure that Goat Milk created and, prevented them from running away with the score to at least keep the team in the game, even if it didn't work out in the end. Slim Reaper, I mentioned before when I was going over the goalie stats, is having his strongest statistical season so far, which makes sense because his team is doing a lot better than some of the other teams he's been on. So we'll see if they're able to continue the success that they've had. David Seaman is supposed to be a big part of this team. I've said the whole time that I feel like David Seaman was somewhat overrated by Young Money, where they were acting like he was like the star go-to guy. And since the formation that I've seen them going with when David Seaman has shown up has been V-Flex still in that last man back D style, and David Seaman is like the 4th guy that's like in the mid offensive going around checking and stuff like that. After seeing their last game, they might be better off trying to get an offensive guy and just keep V-Flex in that last man D spot, or have Dave and V-Flex rotate that spot, because you don't want a player like Dave to be in that 4th man spot. You just don't. I mean, he's good at checking. His positioning could be better, in my opinion. Needs some work, but it's not that bad compared to some others. But his puck handling skills and his offensive skills are completely atrocious. Like, it's not just like they're not good or they're not, serviceable in comparison to some of the better forwards in the league. It's like they're not good on any level. It's very bad, very poor. He is not good at passing. He does not have good offensive awareness at all. And that's fine. I mean, if he's going to be in that last man back spot, I mean, sometimes with those crazy defenders, they are kind of one-dimensional like that. I mean, there are other players in the league like that. But you have to be willing to kind of embrace that role and play that role if that's what you're most suited to. Because you need that 4th man on offense to be able to push up. If you can't push forward, you need to rotate the puck back to him, and then he needs to be able to create space and move up himself, or to cycle the puck appropriately. And I just don't think either of those things are in David Seaman's skill set, so I do think that he needs to rotate with V-Flex in that last man back spot a little bit. Because if the problem of your team is going to be that you're not manufacturing as many goals as you need to, you don't want a one-dimensionally defensive player as your 4th man on offense. But, those are my 2 cents there. But they've done well. And we'll see if they're able to continue that throughout the season. I said that a couple times already, but whatever. So now we're going to move to playmakers. In 3rd place, they are 3-3 at the moment, and this is probably one of the more controversial teams to do. based on some of the trades that they've made. They actually just made a trade today that I'll go over as well. I had actually kind of planned to do this beforehand, and then I saw that trade went through, so I'll add something about that just off the cuff. So 3-3, 6 points. Good goal differential, I guess. 36 points for. They scored a lot of goals, 24 goals against. But they have underperformed compared to what people expected. I mean, they lost a game to Salty Puckers. They lost that overtime game to Young Money off of the own goal, which is heartbreaking. I mean, they lost to Goat Milk, which is fine. I mean, it's not like you can't really say, they should have won that game. It's fine for them to lose that game. You expect to lose some games against the better teams. But for me, the biggest story of this team has been chemistry. And the dynamic of this will change a little bit with some of the most recent trades. But to this point, the team just has too many wild cards and not enough kind of stable role player type players. Zeppelin is kind of that goal scoring specialist. Not that he's bad at other things per se. Like he does fine with some checks and some steals sometimes. He's not completely one-dimensional, but he definitely is a goal-scoring specialist. And as with any specialist, there are sacrifices to other parts of your game that exist when you have a specialty. And players like Zeppelin and even Zaynaz, to a degree, they are both the kind of players who take a lot of offensive looks. I mean, and you do have to take a high volume of shots to manufacture large amounts of goals. And low percentage shots too. I mean, those are where some of those extra goals that other people's don't score are going to come into play. Is if you continually take those low percentage shots, sometimes you're going to make those amazing goals that go in, and you're like, wow, that was incredible. The problem is that sometimes players like Zaynaz and Zeppelin, if there's nothing else going on, you expect them to take those shots sometimes and just see what they can get out of it. But sometimes they'll take those low percentage shots when there is a player right next to them that has like a much better angle or a much more open lane or something like that, and they take the shot anyway. Which I said is fine. I mean, if you want to score those low percentage goals, you have to kind of mix things up sometimes. The problem is you have too many of this kind of player on this team, or did. You have Zaynaz, who keeps the puck a lot and tries to take a lot of the offensive looks for his team. Zeppelin has always been a guy who's tried to take the most offensive looks for his team. And it makes sense he developed a style that way. I mean, there were about 4 or 5 seasons when BSK was bad, or at least you can say not as good as they were in some of their later seasons, where they struggled a lot, and Zeppelin was kind of like the guy that was leading the charge. So he kind of developed a style as being that star of that team without a whole lot of other stars picking up the slack, So he developed kind of a solitary offensive style in a way. And then Botmem, a very gimmicky player, which is one of the trades I'll talk about is Doobie for Botmem, but a wild card for sure. He tries a lot of unpredictable stuff. He tries a lot of little tricks and maneuvers that people aren't expecting, and that's kind of how he tries to get his advantages. One of the problems with Botmem is he's not very active right now, and when he was considered to be a better player and people thought he was, one of the best players, I mean, I thought that he was solid at one point, but I do think that was a little bit of exaggeration to say that he was, like a very, very top player. But it was when he was very active. And you have to be really active, and you have to practice those little gimmicks and maneuvers in order for them to work, because you're just not going to execute them properly a lot if you're not active. So when you have all these players like this in combination, you don't have those stable, consistent guy who's trying to cycle the puck, who's trying to pass and play. I guess what you would consider the traditionally proper style of Hockey Zone. You need those kinds of guys to kind of hold the lineup together and make sure that things go smoothly. And those chemistry problems are one of the reasons that I think that playmakers have underperformed thus far. Now, one reason I do think it is interesting is because of the trades that playmakers have made. So the first one is Doobie for Botman. Now, just off face value, I like Doobie as a player much more than Botman. I do think that he has more individual skill. And Doobie has fallen off some from maybe his earlier seasons, like when he was, one of the first players in the league, and then like the early teen seasons where he was like this goal-scoring monster who was always putting up tons of points and was like one of the number one guys on his team. He's kind of fallen off from that point to where he's no longer like that number one guy on the team most of the time that's like just carrying himself. But he, even after he fell off, he's still been consistently good. And to me, he's become one of those just consistently good role-playing type players where, he's going to pass properly. He's going to hit the open shots that are in front of him. He's going to try to play, that puck cycling game that is considered to be the proper way, where you're not just kind of throwing yourself at the net over and over like maniacs, or trying to, just ball kill over and over, or cluster in front of the net. And the interesting thing is that based off of what I was saying about the wild cards and stuff like that and the chemistry on this team, players like that are the players that you want to round out to fill up your lineup so that things are going smoothly. And he traded this guy away. I mean, he would have been perfect to be in a lineup with these guys because he would have been able to make it a little bit more stable and consistent, I think. I mean, players like Zeppelin and Zanaz and Botman were all trying off their different things. And if none of them are hitting those crazy shots and goals and those offensive looks that they take up from the team, I mean, that's just it. You don't really have anything to fall back on, Now, one interesting thing is that out of these wildcard players, Zanaz has been far the most effective thus far. I mean, he has 11 goals and 11 assists. He's one of the league leaders in goals, tied with Thrill. He has 11 assists, so he's up there in points as well. I think he's only behind Londorf, who has a couple more points. Even though he's been playing Weasel, he has 121 steals, 146 TO, very close to even, which is very impressive. And he's been that guy. I mean, he scored a lot of big impact goals for them as well. That was the difference maker for them in a lot of games. And then you look at, say, Zeppelin, who has 8 goals and 7 assists, so he's still putting up offensive production like he normally does. But, he has faltered a little bit this season compared to other seasons where, and a lot of the reason of that is I feel like is kind of an uncomfortable playing in that style where you're used to being that guy who's taking a lot of looks, and now you have other players on the team that are trying to take a lot of looks, and you're taking looks away from each other. And just the way that these players focus on the game and the way that they play, it's not like they're opening up each other for better shots. I mean, they're just kind of doing their thing, But his still TO is much worse, 73, 129. He does have a little bit less ice time, but he still has, a fair bit less points. And hasn't been able to have the success in other seasons this far. Botman, 9 goals and 5 assists, but considering he's taken about as many shots as Zanaz and Zeppelin and isn't getting those goals, is kind of a problem. And the most interesting thing about this is that Zanaz, who has been out of these wild card players, the most consistent, the guy who has kind of won them their games, in my opinion, just traded for Funky from Chicks with Sticks. And I think that part of the reason this trade happened was Violence maybe was in agreement with me, and maybe he just didn't see it at first, but then he started to see, team isn't really working together very well. Maybe we need another solid, consistent guy instead of, that guy that you expect to kind of take away a lot of offensive looks and kind of be the main number one guy of the team. And Funky is one of those players. I mean, he's kind of been like a perennial team player in the past, right? He doesn't wow your socks off like the top goal scorers, but he will score goals. He'll hit those open shots that he's supposed to hit. He'll pass around well and cycle the puck well. And they need that player. You know, they need players like that. They had one in Doobie, which they traded for Botman, which I thought was awful. But now he's trying to rectify that a little bit. The problem is with Funky, I do think he fills that role that Doobie does, or would, fine. I mean, Funky is a very good player, I think, when he shows up. The problem is that he's a much less active version of Doobie. I mean, Doobie shows up to most of the games and always has. And Funky has had streaky activity at best, even when he was, you know, even in earlier seasons when most of the zone was more active. I mean, he was never that guy that was at every single game. So if Violence can't persuade him, Funky, to show up to every game, so they'll still have some of those problems, I think. Except that he's also probably going to show up less than Xanaz, so... The trade is interesting. I mean, I can't fault Violence that much because it does fulfill some need that the team has of getting those more role player type players to round out the lineup. But it's interesting to me that the player you chose to do it with was the one that's been the most consistent for you so far. And the other thing is that sorry, drink of water. He's not going to even necessarily be as good as, you know, you need him to be, like, value-wise for trading away a player like Xanaz. So even if in Violence's mind he's like, okay, I've played with Funky a lot, I know that Funky's peak level is very high, which I agree with. I think that Funky can be a very good player. So he doesn't feel like it's uneven in that way. But a lot of these trades and stuff like that, I mean, you're going off of perceived value in the league. And based off of the activity and based off some of the previous stats and the fact that Funky's never been around as much and some people might not have as much exposure to him as Xanaz. I mean, Xanaz definitely has more perceived value than Funky. So the fact that this trade happened straight up is not very good. Because even if Violence is like, I'm completely fine with this based on Funky's ability, which I'm sure he is, you could have gotten more value for Xanaz from somewhere. Like, you probably even could have, I mean, theoretically, gotten another player from Chicks with Sticks. You could have done it for Funky plus, you know, one other mid or lower tier guy that could show up and be a filler player. You know, I don't think that's unreasonable to say. Or you could have traded him to another team where they would have traded more than just Funky, you know, an inactive role player for Xanaz, who's at this point seems like one of the better guys in the league in terms of production. But it might work out okay, you know, because it will open up Zeppelin to have a little bit more room to start doing what he does, and to not have other, you know, top guys kind of taking away those offensive looks from each other and kind of clashing. Ziz has been their goalie, and he's been doing just fine. You know, not incredible, but definitely serviceable. You're happy with 80%. I mean, I kind of think that's what you're shooting for. You really want your goalie to be at around 80% or plus. But you're not unhappy if your goalie's at 80%. Probably 78% is that point where you're like, okay, this is still pretty decent. And then once you get below the 78%, you're like, okay, I want my goalie to be performing a little bit better. So he's doing just fine right now. Now, one big thing is, of course, Violence did get the infamous Antsy trade, which was Vigilante and Xanaz for Kai and Holly Smoot. So he won out on that, except now he's traded Xanaz for Funk, so he lost some of that value. But Vigilante has been a lot more active than people anticipated. I mean, he has 117 minutes already, and he's been solid. 6 goals, 6 assists. You know, he's a team-oriented player, so that's good. But you have to say, based on Xanaz's high production and Vigilante's activity, it probably was a big mistake for Understand to trade them away, regardless of what the reasons were, because you got to think they'd be doing a lot better with these guys on the roster. You would think, anyway. I spent probably a little bit too much time with playmakers, so we'll move on. I've kind of have been ranting, I realize that. So, Salty Puckers, I have the least information about them because they've only played 3 games. I will say this, that they haven't been uncompetitive, really, in any of their games. Like, they lost to Young Money, and that was a pretty competitive game. Like, they got dominated in the first period, but then when Jowrix came in the game, it was a very tight game. They won a game against Playmakers in overtime, another very close game. They lost to Understand, and what I would consider to be a close game, because it was like the other times, they had Artos playing in net for some of that game, and he played awful. He had like a 40% save percentage or something atrocious. And he probably just straight up lost them this game because Understand scored all these goals in the first period. And Salty Puckers was in control of some of the game after that, but, I mean, those 5 goals in the first period, I mean, the damage was kind of done. So they did lose to Understand, which is a huge blow, but you can see, based on the way that the game progressed, if it hadn't been for the bad goaltending performance, they probably could have come away with that game. Activity, huge problem with this team. Because of depth. I mean, you've got kind of Jowrix, you've got Phil Holes, Yager, Blucka, whatever you want to call him. Very offensively talented player. And that's really it. I mean, some people will argue that Mace 2-3 is up there. Mace 2-3 has been bad the past couple of seasons. And as he's gotten more inactive, he has not been able to maintain a good level of performance, in my opinion. Maybe he'll turn that around. Cocaine has been playing some Warbird some. No, please don't. I mean, you're a defensive player. You don't need to be playing offense at all. If you do, you at least need to be playing Terrier or something that you can get checks with, because that's the main part of your game. Iggy is fine, but he's just kind of there. He's like one of those role player kind of guys. Completely fine to have some players like that on your team. In my opinion, players like that are best off of the bench. Like, you have your lineup with your top guys, and then you want to have some solid players on the bench that are going to come in and perform at a decent level and not lower the level of the team too much. And Iggy's one of those guys for me, I think, where you can just sub him in. Unfortunately for this team, he's probably a starter because they don't have very much firepower on the team. And one problem that this team has, I won't go into the specifics, but I had been discussing a trade with Jowrix, and it was, a 3-way trade. And some of these trades, at the end of the result, would have been Jowrix getting more players than he traded away, just based on the value. And one of his responses was that he had too many players on his team, and he was already struggling to thought he was going to struggle to be able to even the playing time out, which is an understandable concern, but with this kind of roster, not a problem you want to have. Like, if you're having a problem distributing playing time like that, you want the problem to be that you have a lot of very good players who all deserve a ton of playing time, and you're having trouble giving them all time because, they could be, very good players on other teams. But when the players that are vying for this player time are kind of these mid-tier or even mediocre players that you have to distribute a lot of this playing time out to, not really a problem you want to have, in my opinion. So, like I said, there's not much else to go on for Salty Puckers because they've only played a couple of games. Of course, Cereal and Milk is kind of the salvation of this team, right? You've got 92% save percentage. But like I said, they've only played a couple games, so that might not stick up. But I do think that he will perform very well. And he'll have to kind of step up and just carry this team on his back if they want to make playoffs and make any kind of waves at all. But if this team can show their top line, they will be competitive with most teams in the league, even though I don't think they'll be competitive in terms of the standings. I mean, if you have Jowrix, fill holes, and you have some good role players around them, Cocaine playing mid maybe, and then Serial Milk and net. I mean, that's a decent lineup. And even if they don't win a ton of games, they will steal some games off of teams and will be competitive in a lot of their games. I do think they should probably try to make some trades to get some more firepower if they can. The problem is I don't see a whole lot of value on their team that they can trade away to get that to happen. Maybe if they can get another player to trade a more offensive-oriented guy for like a role player, or maybe if they can get a player like Chrono that randomly shows up on the waivers. I mean, that would be perfect for them probably. But like I said, I don't really have a lot to say about Salty Puckers because I just have limited information based on the games they've played. So Chicks with Sticks, this is the other interesting one. They're 1-4. People expected a little bit better. I personally had them at third, I believe. And I had them switching, between second and third based on their roster strength of playmakers. It's not been the case to this point. Although roster-wise, they definitely can't compete with that. Honestly, the main problem that this team has had is that their roster has improved so much. And that's one of the reasons that they haven't performed well. Which is what I was alluding to earlier when I said I'm going to explain why I think this team isn't performing well. So, ironically, I think that this team was actually better off with the worst roster that they used to have when it was, Goldeye and just the original iteration of the roster, where they didn't have nearly as strong of a roster on paper that they have right now. Because talent-wise, Mirtrix won out on several trades and improved his roster. Now the problem is when they had the worst roster, they were playing this style around the Boogeyman, their goalie, the Lancaster goalie, where they were playing, the double levy, everyone get back and play a ton of defense, and just try to eke out goals, or wait until late in the game when the other team gets frustrated and kind of score the goals there. And kind of just grind games out. Which is what they needed to do with the roster they have, because they would not have gone toe-to-toe with some of the better rosters in the league, skill-wise. Now the problem is, now that they have improved their roster, they are playing a more traditional style of trying to win the games, through talent, through playing a more proper style of hockey zone, which is completely fine. I mean, and that's what you would think you would do with a roster like that. The problem is that in terms of the traditional goalie attributes, even though I'm sure he will rage at me for saying this, Boogeyman is below average in pretty much every goalie attribute, I would say. I mean, he doesn't have good reflexes. His reflexes are kind of slow. He doesn't have the best anticipation. He kind of misreads plays a lot from what I've seen. He definitely is out of position quite often and lets in, soft goals when he's left to his own devices without that solid team defense. And that was one thing I was saying to him before about the Lancaster. I mean, the Lancaster's a limited ship, but I applauded him for finding a niche kind of role with this Lancaster team style that he could still contribute to his team, where otherwise he would kind of be a liability. Well, what's happened here is that his team's roster has improved, and now that they're not playing that, incredibly defensive, turtle-y style that's completely based around Boogeyman, he's become a bit of a liability. And he'll probably think that's harsh or disagree, but you can't really argue with the stats. You can't really argue with the eye test, the way that he's performed. He has not performed well in these games, and he's had excuses for it that I think he believes. But, I mean, the reality just is that in terms of standard hockey zone, he's just not a very good goaltender skill-wise. He depends on, his ship, a combination of his ship and his team playing around him to put up the performances he does. And that's why his performances have always been way better in playoffs than any other context, because your team is playing that more defensive style. Other teams are also playing their offense more conservatively too, because they're afraid of counterattacks. And I mean, I think that's a big reason why this team has underperformed. I mean, if I've looked at some of their games, like their most recent loss against Playmakers, where they lost 5-1. But up until, the later parts of that game, the game was somewhat competitive, and the game was pretty even in terms of puck time and shots, up until well past the halfway point into the game, into the third period. The only differential in the stats between puck time and shots in that game were the goals allowed, where Boogeyman had just allowed more goals than the other goalie. And they were not good goals. Like, they were not like, oh, they passed around him and he had no chance, or, oh, his defense made an error. It was just kind of goals that were probably savable that he just didn't save. So now that he's upgraded the rest of his roster, Miratrix is kind of in this rough situation where he was depending on this goalie to perform at an acceptable level, but now that they're not playing around him because they have more talent, I mean, why would you play around him as your sole kind of star if he's not really a star caliber player? I mean, you can't consider somebody a star if he depends on a lot of other players in order to put up that performance, right? So when you have players like Banana Squadron, Doobie, Arcadian, D-Money, and now even Xanaz after the trade, you're not going to make the Boogeyman the focal point of your team. But since he cannot really goaltend very well in that proper style, and he's going to be a liability in that sense, I think that they probably need to just get another goalie. I mean, they have a lot of talent on their roster now. They need to make some trades to get a goalie who will thrive more in the traditional hockey zone style. Or they can just try to hope that they can turn things around and eke out into playoffs, and then maybe in the playoff style they can, he'll improve his performance a little bit more because he'll have a lot more defense. But even then, I just the way that they're gonna be trying to win the game based off controlling the puck and scoring more goals than the other team, just based on the roster that they have, So I just don't think that he's the right goalie to have in this kind of team. But roster-wise, I mean, they're great now. If you look at some of the trades that Miratrix has been able to pull off, I mean, before, if you think about this, he got Funky, he got Funky from Understand for not very much. I think it was for Goldeye. I forget the exact trade. Anyways, he got Funky on a trade where people thought that he was getting the better end of the deal. And then he upgraded Funky to Xanaz. You think about that, it's like these stories on the internet where you find a guy who started with a scooter and he traded his way up to, like a Porsche. That's kind of what happened here. He's taken some trades where he's kind of incrementally improved the value, and then it's kind of just kept going up. So he's done well trading-wise. I mean, he got Doobie for Botmem. That's a great deal. I'll take that deal any day of the week. And so now you have this strong roster. I mean, Arcadian, Banana Squadron, Xanaz, these are some of the better players in the league. Doobie, D-Money. I mean, this is solid. Like I said, they need that goaltender who can thrive in that more traditional style of hockey zone, though, with this roster. They signed Buckcat off of the waivers. I don't think he really fits in with that traditional style either. He's more of a run-and-gun kind of guy. I think he would fit in more with something like Young Money or Salty Puckers. I know Jowix kind of likes those interference guys anyway, where their focus is trying to score the goals based off skill and technique and stuff like that, which is kind of what Buckcat has traditionally done. Score goals off of odd man rushes. But I think that maybe he should try to work out some trades, maybe for Buckhead or maybe for some of this other value. I mean, you might not even need all these players. I mean, Banana Squatch and Arcadian Doobie, D-Money, Zanaz, like, you don't need all of this. I mean, it's great to have all that, but if you have another position on your team that requires an upgrade, which the goalie does, in my opinion, you can trade some of this value away for a better goalie, and that's what I would do. I do think that if they do that, they will definitely start winning a lot more games, and I do expect that they'll finish 4th or above anyway. If they get a good goalie, they might finish 3rd or 2nd. We'll see. That brings us to understand the teams that everybody wants to love and wants to do well, because they have a lot of likable guys, but the talent just really isn't there. 1 win, 5 losses, almost allowed 50 goals in 6 games. It's rough. Their goalie has 144 saves or something crazy just because of the amount of shots that they've been facing. 75 save percentage, that's Mitch. And he's done an admirable job, but, nothing crazy. I think Mitch is a solid middle-of-the-pack goalie, but even if they had the best goalie in the league, that's not going to save you if you're facing this amount of shots and you're getting out-controlled with the puck to that degree. Like I said, firepower is the big concern with this team. They just don't have the firepower to go up with other teams. They had a little bit of a chance, with players like Vigilante and Zanaz, who have been pretty active. But even with them, I think that it just would have made them more competitive, and they still would have been at the bottom of the standings. But now they're really at the bottom of the standings. I will say that they did win the game against Salty Puckers, and some of their games have not been blowouts. I mean, they have had some blowouts. But just the fact that they've won a game this earlier in the season already, they kind of exceeded my expectations. So, yeah, I mean, they've won a game. I look forward to seeing them win more games. I will say that, it sounds weird to say this, but even though they've got blown out several times, they actually have played better than I expected them to where, just looking at their roster, you would have to say, like, you think that this team might get mercied almost every game. But they haven't. I mean, there have been some games that have been reasonably close or where they've lost by 3 or 4 goals. And some games where they had the lead for a while. So they've done better than I expected in that sense, so good job. JDM Spoon specifically has performed very well. He leads the league in steals and turnovers, but, But he has 7 goals and 6 assists, 13 points. And considering that he hasn't had much to work with, and he's, he's on the bottom tier team of the league, he's done very well to put up these numbers. Kai has been playing some Levy defense, which I'm confused at. You got to think if this team had chances, it would be, if they're going to exceed expectations, you would think that a player like Kai is going to be the one that has to step up. Where Kai, of course, when he was playing with me on Vegan Police, had that breakout season out of nowhere, where he had previously never really accomplished very much, and then randomly had like a 40-goal season. And then fell off with shorthanded the next season. I mean, he kind of needs some infrastructure around him, I feel like, to bring out the best of him. But I do think it's weird that you're going to take your only player that has a history of scoring goals in the league, especially when you're on a bottom tier team where there's not a lot of goal scoring players, and put him in Levy defense. I'm not sure if this is something he asked for, but I don't know if I agree. But oh well. Antsy himself has 5 goals and 3 assists. He had a lot of goals in their win, where they had that win against Salty Puckers, so he's done okay. Janky, I think, was one guy that Antsy was depending on having some offensive production, but in 150 minutes, he has just 3 points, 2 goals, and 1 assist. So, Janky was one of those guys that a few seasons ago I kind of thought would develop into something more than he has, and he's kind of stayed at the same level where he shows some potential and some flashes of brilliance with some of his good passes sometimes, but hasn't really improved beyond that point. And now he's not very active, so that can be a concern. And that's about all there is to say for this team. I mean, they need some firepower. I mean, they have Strike that they got from the free agency. That was a great pickup for them based on who else was available in the free agents. But if now he has kind of demanded to be traded and hasn't been showing up for them. So that's really unfortunate. I hope he can find a good trade to get some value out of Strike for that. Unfortunately for him, just the way that Strike has kind of handled that whole deal might have made it less likely that a team wants to trade for him. So it's going to be pretty hard for him to get value out of that. So that was kind of like, ended up being a little bit of a waste, I guess, unless Strikes randomly starts showing up and putting in some work. He also got Regiments, which could be okay. I mean, at one point in time, Regiments was a decent player. I mean, if the very best players from this team all show up, they can put together a semi-competitive lineup, like in the vein of Salty Puckers, where even if they don't win a lot of games, they'll at least be competitive enough to where they're not getting blown out on a regular basis. Well, I did ramble a lot, so this probably ended up being longer than I wanted it to be, and I repeated stuff a lot, so. But it's my first time doing something like this, so I apologize for the quality and lack of production value, but let me know if you liked it doing this way or if you preferred, you know, the write-up. And I'll probably do another video like this around the 10-game mark, and then the end of the season, like pre-playoffs kind of thing. And I might do little short videos if something major happens at any point in time. Like if there's a big game, like for the playoff race or something. We'll see. But thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. Have a nice day.